Senator Merkley. Hi.
All right. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We're so happy to see you. Thank you so much for being here. You're one of our favorite people.
Well, I'm just delighted to be with you, Kristen, Chuck, Erica, Morris. That was an excellent presentation of how the system is rigged. And the word rigged kind of resonates in so many different ways right now. And I'm thinking of it in terms, for example, of the US Senate, where tax cuts for the ultra wealthy require 51 votes or 50 plus a vice president. Or on the other hand, you have investments in healthcare, housing, education, living wage jobs, or policy related to those things, or the Equality Act, or the DREAM Act, or taking on climate chaos requires 60 votes. And so just there in the Senate, it's an example of how the system is rigged for the powerful and against ordinary working people. And of course, this manifests itself in policies of all type, but particularly in the tax code. I've asked my team to take a look around the world and try to find countries that have as much wealth inequality as we have, or as much income inequality as we have, and see where representative democracy has been able to turn things back to reduce that wealth inequality, reduce the income inequality, do major investments in the foundations for families to thrive, healthcare, housing, education, living wage jobs. And I can tell you the results so far are that we don't have a good example. And why is that? Because that wealth at the top, the more and more out of balance it gets, the more ways it can be wielded. It can be wielded with huge numbers of lawyers at work day and night, with huge numbers of lobbyists on Capitol Hills, with huge investments in campaigns, with huge investments in trying to get the right court system that will decide things like Citizens United that says corporations can give unlimited sums into campaigns as long as they don't give it directly to the candidate. And so this has caused me to think about this upcoming in the following way. Think about a baseball game. First base, the issue of getting to first base is November 3rd. Will we have a majority of the House and Senate and an Oval Office dedicated to an equitable tax system and other forms of equity, if you will, on November 4th? That's first base. Then you've got to unrig the Senate. And then if you unrig the Senate, you can unrig the federal elections, take on gerrymandering, voter suppression, and dark money. I mention those because one of the principles that you all have advocated for is equal political representation, which really is essential if you're going to have an equitable tax system. So the For the People Act that takes on gerrymandering, voter suppression, and dark money is essential. And then you have the possibility of getting to home plate, which is pass a bill for a vastly improved tax system, pass a bill for investments in healthcare and housing and education, take on the DREAM Act, take on the Equality Act that I wrote 5 years ago for the LGBTQ community to have full open doors in America, take on climate. So that's the home run. And that could all happen before the August recess of next year. But none of it happens if we don't win, if we don't make it to first base on November 3rd, and if we don't unrig the Senate. Because I can tell you, there is no way we're going to get a majority as long as we give McConnell, even if he's in the minority, he will exercise the McConnell veto and prevent us from getting those 60 votes to be able to close debate on key bills. So I wanted to just paint that picture of the home run that could happen and how we get there before August of next year. I say August because that's the August recess. And after the August recess, people start thinking about the campaign a year and a half out, et cetera. And so we really have to come in with a fierce determination. If we have the political capital in terms of the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office, we have to come in and we can't let the shenanigans slow everything down. One of those is the supermajority that I've mentioned, or McConnell veto. Another is time wasted on nominations. And so the Republicans said, hey, we want to be able to confirm 4 4 district or circuit court judges a day. So we will, by magic, take 30 hours of time and change it to 2 to confirm a judge, to debate a judge. We're going to also have to think about that issue because otherwise, another big tool McConnell will have to prevent us from making that home run is forcing the Senate to spend all their time on nominations. I'm just going to stop there. And it's a pleasure to be invited to join the panel. And I'm very excited about the big turnaround America could make between now and August of next year, if we get through November 3rd with flying colors.
Senator Merkley, we're so with you. And I want to point out to everybody, America turns 250 years old in a few years. Let's set this next 250 years up as like the very best time in American history. We can rebuild this. It's pretty simple. That's one of the things we emphasize. This is not complicated. People pretend like taxes are complicated, but they want you to think they're complicated because they want to confuse you on purpose. You know? All right, so we've got some great questions. Let's start jumping in. We've got Gabriel Paulson. Thanks for putting on this series. You're welcome. I hope to get more involved. Awesome. Go to taxtherich.com. Currently, I'm on City Council in Marin, California. Awesome. And advocating with state and federal agencies. Question: does Patriotic Millionaires collaborate with Americans for Tax Fairness? We sure do. They are fabulous partners. We have we have a variety of partners we work with. Americans for Tax Fairness is a fabulous partner. So that's that. Deborah Drucker says the argument I always hear against taxing capital gains at the same rate as earned income is that taxing capital gains is double taxation. Can you address this, please? Morris, you're on mute.
Sorry, just afraid that, no, capital gain, when I buy some stock and then later sell it, I'm only taxed once on that. It's true the corporation that makes profits, that makes stock go up, may pay corporate taxes too, but that's separate. That's a separate entity, as the Republicans often want to point out. And as a part of the privilege of having a corporation that can live forever, that can have limited liability and do all those things, they pay corporate taxes, but that's separate from me paying capital gains taxes when I'm selling stock that I bought in the past. So no, I don't think that's a valid argument to not pay capital gains tax. And also many things, of course, are not corporate stock. If I buy land or a building or a house or an art, pieces of art, and sell those, none of those are taxed in any way other than when I sell them as a capital gain. So no, I don't think that's a valid argument against taxing capital gains.
Great. Can you all explain a little bit more about how we can go about reforming the estate tax and the inheritance tax? So Chuck, why don't you talk a little bit about the difference between those first?
Sure. We've had, since after the First World War, an estate tax, a tax on the estate when someone dies, all of their wealth, when it exceeds a fairly high threshold. And as we talked about in the presentation, right now, the Republicans have raised that wealth threshold to over 11 million, 22 million for a couple. That's when the estate tax starts. The problem is it's been an uphill battle to defend it. It's getting more and more porous. As Senator Merkley says, people hire attorneys and wealth planners to game and create loopholes around the estate tax. So it's a porous and weakened tax. It might make sense to explore transitioning to an inheritance tax where the tax is actually paid by the recipient, by the heir. So right now, you know, if I find a bag of money, if I find millions of dollars, I have to report it and pay taxes on it. But if my aunt gives me the money, I don't have to pay any taxes on it. We could change that. We could say inheritance income is another form of taxable income, just like income from wages and income from capital. And we should tax it at a progressive rate. And in that way, maybe a tax on the recipient might be easier to make the political case that this is a windfall, and it should be taxed, in an appropriate way. And it could be designed so it only falls on people whose, again, their inheritances are above a certain threshold, over 2 million, say. That's when an inheritance tax could kick in. I know this is something the senator has been thinking about too, so I don't know if he has a thought on that. But
Senator, do you want to add anything to that, or you want to pop to the next question?
I won't add anything on that, but on the previous question on the double taxation with corporations, as Morris was talking about it, it's also a fact that if that stock you had that you sold was Amazon stock or Chevron stock or Netflix stock or who knows how many others, they didn't pay anything at the corporate level at all. So in there, that just reinforces his argument.
Well, and Senator Merkley, just in general, like, why do we care if something's double taxed?
Well, in political terms, it is an effective emotional argument. I paid once. I shouldn't have to pay again, especially if other people are getting off the hook. So, I mean, I think it's a phrase designed to address the heart and pretend it's addressing the brain, but it's about an indignation that, wait, that sounds unfair.
All right, this is a great one and timely. Senator Merkley, how do things like the Supreme Court and Amy Coney Barrett's nomination affect the prospects for actually taxing the rich?
Well, it affects it enormously. And just think about the cases about political representation that have gone through the court and are pending to go through the court. You have situations where the court was asked to look at gerrymandering, and they threw up their hands and said, it's just too hard. We're not going to take that case. Well, that results in very unequal representation and basically says to states, you got the green light, go ahead and do it all you want. And that accounts in the House of Representatives for an estimated 15 to 20 seat bias in favor of the Republicans. And then think about the issue of voter intimidation and suppression. The court weighed in and said, we are gutting the Voting Rights Act. And they did. And now we have just rampant voter suppression and intimidation. We have a president who's trying to mislead the entire nation, saying vote by mail has less integrity than voting at the polls. But what we really know is voting at the polls has huge ways of being manipulated. You reduce the number of polling places, you reduce the staffing, you put in bad machines, you change the location. You tell people that the location is one place when it's actually another place, etc. And then I mentioned Citizens United. And think about this. Let's say you have a multi-billion-dollar corporation and they have a board of 25 people. That board, when they decide to take their money and invest it in a campaign, they're not investing their money, they're investing the stockholders' money. And the stockholder doesn't even have a say. And so you have this huge leveraged power among that very small group serving on the board in terms of their political influence. And what did the court do? They said, sounds like a corporation, sounds just like an individual. An individual has free speech, corporation has free speech. They can do this. And so the court makes these critical decisions time and time again that affect really where the political power is in America. And we see these things just one after another. Can votes that were held up in the mail be counted if they arrive at the state balloting place at the precinct or whatever the definition is, if they arrive at election headquarters after election day? Well, the court's going to weigh in on that. In Texas, you have a court, the Supreme Court of Texas, that has said it's okay for the governor to decree that local election officials can't put out more than one ballot box in a county. So you have a county of 150 and you have a county of over 4 million. And what's that aimed at? It's voter suppression. It's to keep a lower turnout among the rather blue, large urban county and higher turnout in the rural county. So the courts are playing a huge role. So along comes another justice steeped in the Federalist Society vision of essentially, let's rig the courts for the rich. Let's rig them for the business, the top end. And I think Sheldon Whitehouse, among the senators, has done an excellent job just laying out how he can point to some 85-4 decisions that were essentially split between the 5 justices who were appointed and from a more conservative tradition and the 4 more progressive judges. And so it is very clear that the Federalist Society has vetted Amy Barrett to make sure she's going to weigh in the conservative Federalist Society tradition and use this kind of originalist argument to justify her decision. Let me just point out that there were no corporations of the style and size we have now at the time that our Constitution was written. And so the originalist is actually creating a whole fiction about this in order to justify decisions for the powerful. That makes tax reform so much harder, to have the courts not both directly making decisions, but indirectly constraining the vision of equal political representation. And therefore, there's more power exercised in the House and Senate on behalf of the wealthy. So it matters.
So speaking along those lines, Chris, how do we make sure that politicians spend as much time listening to regular people as they spend talking to rich people?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, I will say I'm a fellow Oregonian, Senator Merkley, so I'm thrilled to be on this webinar with you today. I can tell everyone that's listening, we've voted by mail in Oregon for many, many years without an issue. So I think it's amusing to everyone here in the state that we're all having this national debate. I think unfortunately a lot of politicians have lost touch with, a lot of normal folks. I live in a relatively rural area in Oregon. I'm, fortunate to live where I do, but I do think there's a disconnect between, what politicians are doing in Washington, D.C. and how normal people are living here. And I saw, on one of the other Q&A questions, about the income disparity, and are we heading in into the same direction as we, as France was during the French Revolution. And I can say, when I see comments like on Twitter a couple of days ago, Frank Luntz, who I think is a Republican pollster, made a comment that a fourth grader was having to walk to school to get internet access. That's not a surprise to me, living in a rural community. There's plenty of kids out here that don't have internet access, can't afford a laptop. I think when we get so involved in big city life and following the activities of rich people are becoming deemed to them, that we've forgotten that most of the country is not in the financial position that we are.
Just FYI fact, about 40% of people in America make less than $30,000 a year, for folks on the phone. I'm going to combine two questions here. How do we make sure people like Trump can't get away with paying no taxes? With his $70,000 haircut write-off, and a few years he paid $750, and lots of years he paid nothing. So that's one. And then combine with that, what about enforcement? Don't we need to do something about rich people just deciding they're not going to pay what they owe? Senator Merkley, I'll kick this to you.
Oh, well, what we've seen is the money going to the IRS for enforcement has dropped and dropped and dropped. Republicans hate the idea of their rich donors getting audited. And in fact, there are far more people on a per capita basis audited who are poor, and they're filing the earned income tax credit. And so they're really at the poverty point. They're more likely to get audited than is the billionaire filing taxes. And so the IRS really has created a culture, and I guess you could say Congress has created the culture by not funding the IRS, that you have a good chance of getting away cheating on your taxes if you are a very rich person. So if you think that that write-off is questionable, yeah, go ahead and put it in there. Not likely you're going to get challenged.
Chuck, I'll kick this one to you. Can you speak to what you consider to be the challenge to philanthropy with a change to the tax deduction?
Well, under the 2017 tax cut that we've been talking about a lot here, the personal exemptions raised to the point where only about 10% of the wealthiest part of the population use the itemized deduction. So the number of people who are benefiting from that tax break keeps shrinking. And that leads to philanthropy being more and more top heavy, meaning most donations now are coming from the wealthy. Giving by low and middle income households is going down, partly because people are financially squeezed. But I think we should always remember that philanthropy is not a substitute for what we're talking about here: a fair tax system where wealthy people pay their fair share, where they're not using the charity deduction as a way to aggressively avoid taxes. And philanthropy is private. Philanthropy is a private decision-making space. It is not democratically accountable. So we want to have a fair tax code, and that may mean that we limit some of the ways in which wealthy people aggressively use philanthropy to avoid taxes, where we cap the deduction. I used to work a lot with Bill Gates's dad. He and I worked on campaigning to defend the estate tax. but he would offhandedly say, you know, isn't it interesting that my son is going to give $100 billion to his foundation and he will never pay a nickel of taxes on all that wealth he's created and taken from Microsoft. He says, you know, there's something wrong with that. Maybe we should cap the amount of charitable giving, because charity isn't going to build the infrastructure. It's not going to build the sewage treatment plants. It's not going to fund food stamps. It's not going to be up to the task. It does some things well, but it isn't going to make a difference in the big investments that we need.
Jay Wilson asks, what changes to the tax system will encourage pension funds to divest from fossil fuels and into sustainable development? Green bonds? Senator Merkley, you want to take that one?
Oh, what tax incentives will encourage investment in renewables?
Yeah.
Well, there are tax credits associated both with wind energy and solar energy that in 2015, a group of us were in Paris, and we were on the phone. Ben Cardin was leading the group, senator from Maryland, trying to extend those credits. And they do make a difference in terms of what is the cost-effective ratio of this investment versus others, and can I produce electricity at a rate that the customers will buy it? That is shrinking. That is, wind has gotten so much more cost-effective. Solar has gotten so much more cost-effective. They can compete on a more level playing field. But realize this: the oil side of the equation has massive tax credits and deductions, and so I would love to see those stripped away, because then the conversation wouldn't be about adding something for solar or wind or geothermal, because they'd probably already be on an advantageous level field playing field would be advantageous for renewables. But definitely the imbalance of credits in the energy world favors fossil fuel and slows down the transitions to renewable, and we cannot afford to have a slow transition to renewables.
Lori Slaughter brings up something that we didn't talk about in our presentation. Hi, Senator Merkley, thanks for being here. Can you share your thoughts about how opportunity zone policy can be fixed or replaced in order to actually help low-income communities thrive? And maybe just for folks on the phone who don't know what that is, will you just explain opportunity zones, because it's a racket?
Sure, an opportunity zone, the whole idea was that, look, if you put your operation into a very poor community, that will create wealth in that community, that will create jobs in that community, so you deserve a big tax break. Well, in Portland, Oregon, the opportunity zone, I think, ended up in the middle of the Pearl District, like one of the most expensive areas you can imagine. There's just so many ways to rig this. I'm not even convinced that if a business was put into the middle of a very poor area, that it would help that much, because the effect is that company might still hire people from everywhere else rather than hiring them from the community. And it drives up the expenses for those who are living in that very poor community, actually could make their paycheck run out earlier in the month than it already does. So I'll defer to others who have. I haven't looked at the national. There may be cases where it's worked well, but mostly what I've seen is. Did you call it a scam? Mostly what I've seen are articles that call it a scam.
It just
I could chime in here actually, because I've had businesses in opportunity zones that are now classified as opportunity zones, and when that first came out, you will not imagine the people that came out of the woodwork asking me like, "Hey, we should start a new business and we should start it in X area." But to Senator Merkley's point, you know, the fact of the matter is that, you know, if you're starting a high-tech business, or, you know, a lot of the businesses that are started, you're not going to be employing people in that area. You're either going to have telecommuters or you're going to be relocating people to that area, which, you know, in my hometown, like Bend, Oregon, has caused, you know, a horrible affordable housing crisis. You know, you've got very, very senior C-level executives from San Francisco that now live here in Bend, telecommuting back and forth. And, you know, the people that actually power the city, that work in the restaurants, that work in the hotels, that, you know, live on, you know, serve on city council, you know, work in jobs actually here in the community, cannot afford to live in the city anymore. So
they're not even necessarily starting businesses. A
For
lot of
sure.
them are building housing. I'm familiar with things in near Dodger Stadium, the old United Way headquarters in downtown Atlanta. And someone's building a big apartment building like right near the Pentagon in Virginia. And those aren't creating any jobs for anybody at all, except for the people renovating the buildings. It's opportunity for real estate developers to make money and not pay taxes on their previous deals that they roll into the opportunity zones. That's it.
So we just have a couple of minutes left and we have some other questions. Let me just pop a couple of out, but it's kind of quick answers. Ashwin asked, there's a lot of controversy over a wealth tax. Since so many rich people have their wealth in stocks, why not charge a transaction percentage on the value of every transaction as a tax for people over a certain income range? Senator Merkley?
Well, interesting. Congressman de Fazio from Oregon has really promoted a transaction tax. For one thing, it calms down the high-speed trading where they're looking for microscopic differences. And if there is a transaction tax, it overwhelms that. So there isn't the point in this massive computer-driven swings. And it raises quite a lot of money. I signed on to a bill for a very, very modest transaction tax. I'm not sure that it would even be enough in terms of the very wealthy individuals who are not, I mean, they're not trading their stock often, perhaps they're not going to raise very much money. The wealth tax, however, does go directly at this issue of wealth disparity in America and people paying kind of a fair share for all the infrastructure that we develop, the education infrastructure, the court and public safety infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, and so forth. And so I think that many people are uncertain whether it would pass constitutional muster, especially with this new court. That's a question. On the other hand, philosophically, I support the idea of, say, a 1% wealth tax or something like that as a way, because even with that, when you have folks at the upper end who have many investment opportunities and their average returns hugely exceed what somebody near the bottom gets, 1% still means that let's say they're making 10% annually on their average. And maybe one of you can say, well, that's a fair thing to say, but I think it's in the ballpark. Well, taking 1/10 of that isn't that much, but it would help fund a lot of investments for the base in healthcare, housing, and education.
Fabulous. And we need to wrap because we're right at 5 o'clock, but let's just do a quick closing thoughts from our millionaires, and then Senator Merkley will turn it to you. Morris?
Sure. Senator Merkley, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. We're hoping when our new Tax the Rich book comes out this spring that we're all getting together again, and maybe at Powell's in Oregon, and talking about taxing the rich again. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Chuck?
Thank you, Senator, and we hope we hit a home run and we can start to unrig the tax code. Thank you for your leadership on these matters.
Kristen?
Yeah. Well, Senator Merkley, thanks so much for all that you do for us Oregonians. My parents are also on this call and we're big fans, so I appreciate you doing this. And then secondly, for everyone listening in today, if you haven't voted yet, please go out and vote. Who you vote for is so important. Pay attention to those who are interested in income equality and fixing the broken tax code, and make sure you get your ballot in on time.
Yep, and I'll just remind everybody to go to taxtherich.com, and if you want to host one of these, we'd be happy to come visit you and a group of your pals. Senator Merkley, close us up.
Well, my appreciation is just to all of you on the panel for bringing your expertise to bear to explain with that presentation in such simple terms, these basic, massive, corrupted forms of the tax system. And this has got to be part of the home run. This has got to be part of what gets done before August of next year. So to first base on November 3rd, let's unrig the Senate, unrig the election system, and let's get a great tax reform bill, among other things, done before late next summer. That would be an incredible, beautiful turnaround from the dark and dangerous times of the moment.
Couldn't agree more. Senator Merkley, we're such huge fans. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to everybody else for being here. Visit taxtherich.com. Thanks so much. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.